A few months ago, I received an email that started with just 4 words. I need your help. It was from a woman named Sarah Mitchell from Portland, Oregon. She'd been watching our channel for months, and what she discovered through her DNA results didn't just change her life. It completely rewrote her entire understanding of who she was. For 42 years, Sarah believed she was an only child. Her parents had always told her they couldn't have more children after her difficult birth. She grew up longing for siblings, creating imaginary brothers and sisters, wondering what it would be like to have someone who truly understood her family dynamics. But here's the thing about DNA. It doesn't lie. And when Sarah's results came back, they revealed something that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. She wasn't an only child. She had not one, not two, but 5 biological siblings scattered across the country, all living completely separate lives, all believing different stories about their origins. This is the story of how a simple DNA test for health reasons turned into the most complex family reunion you could imagine. It's a story about secrets that spanned decades, parents who made impossible choices, and siblings who found each other against all odds. So grab your tissues, settle in, and let me tell you about Sarah's incredible journey from only child to the middle sister of 6. To understand how shocking Sarah's discovery was, you need to know her story. Sarah Michelle Mitchell was born in Portland, Oregon in 1981. Her parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, were both in their early 30s, a school teacher and an accountant living a quiet, stable life in suburban Portland. Sarah's birth was difficult. Linda had complications during delivery that required emergency surgery, and afterward, the doctors told the family that having more children would be dangerous for Linda's health. At least, that's what Sarah was always told. Growing up, Sarah was the center of her parents' world. They were attentive, loving, maybe even a little overprotective. Family gatherings were small, just Sarah and her parents, along with her maternal grandmother, who lived nearby. Her father's family was distant, she was told. They lived in other states and weren't very good at staying in touch. But Sarah always felt something was missing. She'd watch other families with multiple children and feel this deep ache. She'd beg her parents for a little brother or sister, and her mother would always get this sad look in her eyes and explain again about the complications during Sarah's birth. Sarah threw herself into activities where she could find the sibling connections she craved. She was the kid who adopted every stray animal, who became the unofficial big sister to neighborhood children, who joined every group and club she could find. She studied psychology in college, partly because she was fascinated by family dynamics, something she felt she'd never truly experienced. By 2023, Sarah was 42, married to her college sweetheart David, and they had 2 children of their own, Emma, 8, and Jake, 6. She'd built her own version of the large family she'd always wanted. But there was still this underlying sadness about being an only child, especially after her father passed away in 2019. Here's what led Sarah to take the DNA test. Her mother, Linda, had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer in late 2022. During treatment, the oncologist asked detailed questions about family medical history. Sarah realized she knew almost nothing about her father's side of the family, and very little about extended family health issues. Linda was supportive when Sarah suggested taking a DNA test for health information. "It's a good idea, honey," she said. "You should know these things for Emma and Jake's sake." Looking back, Sarah says her mother seemed almost relieved. But at the time, Sarah didn't think much of it. So in January 2023, Sarah ordered her Ancestry DNA kit. She was hoping for some health insights, maybe a few distant cousins she could connect with for family medical history. She had no idea she was about to discover that almost everything she'd been told about her family was incomplete. The kit arrived on a Thursday. She did the test that evening, mailed it back Friday morning, and then she waited. 6 weeks later, her entire world, March 8th, 2023. Sarah was having her morning coffee, checking her phone before the kids woke up for school when she saw the notification. "Your Ancestry DNA results are ready." She was excited but not expecting anything dramatic. Maybe some interesting ethnic breakdown, hopefully some health information. She clicked through the ethnicity results first, pretty much what she expected based on what she'd been told about her heritage. Then she clicked on DNA matches, and everything stopped. At the very top of her match list was someone labeled as close family, first cousins, with 1,147 centimorgans shared. The name was Michael Thompson, and he was listed as living in Sacramento, California. Sarah stared at the screen. She'd never heard of Michael Thompson, but 1,047 centimorgans? She'd done enough research before taking the test to know that this was way too high for a first cousin. This was half-sibling territory. She scrolled down. Another close match. Jennifer Walsh in Denver, Colorado. 1,923 centimorgans. Half-sibling range again. Then another. David Rodriguez in Austin, Texas. 1,156 centimorgans. And another. Amanda Foster in Phoenix, Arizona. 1,191 centimorgans. And one more. Christina Lane in Seattle, Washington. 1,802 centimorgans. Sarah told me later that she just sat there, staring at her phone, coffee getting cold in her hand. 5 people, all showing as half-siblings, all with different last names, all living in different cities. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely scroll. Her first thought was that there had been a mistake. Labs mix up samples, right? This had to be wrong. But as she clicked through each profile, she saw that several of them had uploaded photos, and there were similarities. The same green eyes she had, the same nose shape, the same thick dark hair. Sarah called in sick to work and spent the entire day researching, comparing, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. By evening, she was certain these weren't mistakes. These were her half-siblings. That night, after David and the kids were asleep, Sarah composed her first message. She started with Michael Thompson in Sacramento, since he had the highest centimorgan match with her. The message was simple. Hi, Michael. This might sound strange, but Ancestry DNA is showing us as half-siblings. I was born in 1981 in Portland, Oregon. I'm trying to understand these results. If you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to know your birth year and location. Sarah. She sent similar messages to all 5 matches and then waited. 24 hours of checking her phone every few minutes, wondering if anyone would respond, wondering if she was about to learn something that would change everything. Michael was the first to respond 2 days later. Sarah, I've been staring at your message for 2 days. I was born in 1979 in Portland, Oregon, and adopted at birth through Catholic Charities. My adoptive parents told me my birth mother was a teenager who couldn't keep me. I've been searching for biological family for years. This is... Wow. Can we talk? Within a week, all 5 had responded. Every single one had a similar story. Born in Portland between 1977 and 1985, all either adopted or raised by relatives, all told different stories about their origins, all searching for answers. Sarah described that week to me as the most surreal of her life. She'd gone from being an only child to potentially having 5 siblings in a matter of days. But the questions that kept her awake at night weren't just about who these people were. They were about her parents, about the mother who was still alive and had never mentioned that Sarah had siblings, about the secrets that had been kept for over 4 decades. That's when Sarah reached out to me. She needed help making sense of the DNA, building family trees, and most importantly, figuring out how to approach what was clearly going to be the most difficult conversation of her life. Host. When Sarah first contacted me, I have to admit I was skeptical. Not because I doubted her, but because discovering 5 half-siblings at once is extremely rare. Usually, DNA surprises involve 1 or maybe 2 unknown siblings. 5 suggested something much more complex was going on. The first thing we did was verify the relationships. I walked Sarah through uploading her raw DNA data to GDmatch, where we could get more detailed analysis. The results confirmed what Ancestry had shown. These 5 people were definitely her half-siblings. Here's what the DNA told us. Michael Thompson, 1,847 cm shared. Definitely half-brother Jennifer Walsh, 1,923 cm shared. Half-sister, possibly sharing more DNA due to some shared ethnicity. David Rodriguez, 1,756 cm shared. Half-brother Amanda Foster, 1,891 cm shared. Half-sister Christina Lane, 1,802 cm shared. Half-sister. All of these numbers fell squarely in the half-sibling range. But here's what was interesting. When we ran comparisons between all 6 siblings, they didn't all share the same amount of DNA with each other. This suggested they might not all share the same 2 parents. Some patterns indicated they shared a mother, others suggested a shared father. It was becoming clear that this wasn't a simple case of one parent having children they'd never mentioned. We started building family trees for each sibling based on their other DNA matches. This is where things got really interesting and really complicated. Michael's adoptive parents had kept some records from Catholic charities. Jennifer had been raised by her grandmother and had always been told her parents were too young and irresponsible. David knew his father, but had been told his mother died in childbirth. Amanda was adopted through a private arrangement and knew almost nothing. Christina was raised by her mother, but told her father was a one-night stand whose name her mother couldn't remember. Here's what really caught my attention. They were all born in Portland, but at 3 different hospitals. Michael and Sarah were both born at Emmanuel Hospital. Jennifer and Amanda were born at Good Samaritan. David and Christina were born at St. Vincent. Looking at birth dates. Michael, September 1977. Jennifer, March 1979. David, November 1980. Sarah, April 1981. Amanda, June 1983. Christina, August 1985. They spanned 8 years, from 1977 to 1985. This wasn't a situation where someone had multiple children in a short period and had to give them up due to circumstances. This was a pattern spanning nearly a decade. The breakthrough came when we started looking at their shared DNA matches, people who showed up as relatives to multiple siblings. There was one match that appeared for all 6, a woman named Dorothy Mitchell, showing as a potential aunt or great-aunt to everyone. Dorothy Mitchell. Sarah's father was Robert Mitchell. I helped Sarah reach out to Dorothy, who turned out to be Robert's older sister. The conversation was explosive. Dorothy was 78, living in a retirement community in Beaverton, Oregon. When Sarah explained who she was and what she'd discovered, there was a long silence on the phone. Finally, Dorothy said, "Oh, honey, I wondered when this day would come. Your father made me promise never to tell, but Robert struggled with a lot of things when he was younger. He and Linda couldn't have been married to each other when all those children were born." Here's what Dorothy told us. Robert and Linda dated on and off throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. They'd break up, see other people, get back together. During their off periods, Robert had relationships with several different women. He was charming, good-looking, but not ready to settle down. Some of these relationships resulted in pregnancies. The women were young, mostly single, and in the late 70s and early 80s, keeping a baby as a single mother was much more challenging than it is today. Robert helped arrange adoptions for some of the babies, paid for others to be raised by relatives, and in at least one case, stayed somewhat involved, but kept it secret from Linda and later from Sarah. When Sarah was born in 1981, Robert and Linda had just gotten married. Linda knew about some of Robert's children, but not all of them. They made a decision to start fresh, to not talk about the complicated past, and to focus on building their life together. The story about Linda's difficult delivery preventing more children? Partially true. Linda did have complications, but the bigger truth was that Robert already had 5 children he was trying to hide from his new life. Sarah was devastated, not just because of the lies, but because it meant her father had other children he'd apparently cared enough about to stay involved with in some way, yet she'd never been allowed to know them. This is when Sarah made the decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She was going to bring her siblings together, no matter how complicated it got. But first, she had to confront her mother about decades of family secrets. The conversation with her mother was the one Sarah dreaded most. How do you ask someone you've trusted your entire life to explain why they kept such massive secrets? How do you confront the possibility that your whole childhood was built on lies? Sarah waited until a Saturday when David could take the kids out for the day. She drove to her mother's house, the same house she'd grown up in, carrying a folder full of DNA results and family trees we'd constructed. Her hands were shaking as she knocked on the door. Linda opened the door with a smile that immediately faded when she saw Sarah's expression. "Mom," Sarah said, "we need to talk about Dad, and we need to talk about my siblings." Linda went completely pale. She stepped back, letting Sarah into the house, and for a moment just stared at her daughter. "You took that DNA test," Linda finally said. It wasn't a question. What happened next was one of the most emotionally charged conversations Sarah had ever experienced. Linda broke down crying before Sarah even showed her the DNA results. "I knew this day would come," Linda said through tears. I've been dreading it for 23 years, ever since your father died, and I became the only one left who knew the whole truth. Here's what Linda revealed. She and Robert had a complicated relationship in their 20s and early 30s. They loved each other deeply, but Robert wasn't ready for commitment. He was charming, handsome, and yes, he had relationships with other women during their off periods. Linda knew about Michael from the beginning. She was actually the one who drove Robert to the hospital when Michael's mother went into labor. She knew about Jennifer and David too, but she didn't know about Amanda and Christina until years later. When we finally got married, Linda explained, Robert was already paying support for 3 children. He was involved in their lives in different ways, some more than others. But I was so desperate to have him choose me, to choose our life together, that I agreed to keep it all secret. But here's the twist that even we hadn't uncovered in our DNA investigation. Linda had actually met some of Sarah's siblings over the years. Michael's adoptive parents had stayed in touch with Robert, sending updates and photos. Linda had seen Michael graduate from high school, had attended his wedding in 1998, sitting in the back, introduced as family friends. Jennifer's grandmother lived just across town. Robert would visit occasionally, bringing gifts and staying involved in Jennifer's life. Linda knew about these visits, but had never been introduced to Jennifer as Robert's wife. The most shocking revelation. David, Sarah's half-brother born in 1980, had actually been at several family gatherings over the years. He was introduced as the son of Robert's friend from work. Sarah had met one of her half-brothers multiple times and never knew who he really was. Sarah told me she felt like her entire childhood was a lie. Not because her parents didn't love her, but because there had been this whole other family existing parallel to hers, and she'd been denied the chance to be part of it. I could have grown up with siblings, Sarah said through tears during one of our calls. I spent my whole childhood feeling lonely, feeling different, wishing I had brothers and sisters to share things with, and they were right there. Linda's explanation was heartbreaking in its own way. I thought I was protecting you from a complicated situation. I thought it was better for you to have a simple, stable family than to be confused by half-siblings with different mothers, different living situations. I thought we were giving you the best possible life. But perhaps the most devastating part was learning that Robert had wanted to tell Sarah the truth when she was older. He'd talked about introducing her to her siblings when she graduated from college, when she was mature enough to handle the complexity. He died in 2019 before ever getting the chance. The conversation with Linda lasted 6 hours. By the end, both mother and daughter were emotionally exhausted, but something had shifted. For the first time in her life, Sarah understood her family's real story: messy, complicated, and human. But now she had an even bigger challenge. How do you introduce yourself to 5 siblings who've been living their own lives for decades, each carrying their own pain about feeling abandoned or unwanted? What happened next is honestly one of the most beautiful family reunion stories I've ever been part of. But it didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without its complications. Sarah decided to reach out to her siblings one by one before suggesting any group meetings. Each conversation was different. Each relationship had its own dynamic, but there were common threads. Everyone had felt incomplete, everyone had wondered about biological family, and everyone was nervous but excited about connecting. Michael was the easiest connection. He'd been searching for biological family for 20 years and was thrilled to finally have answers. He lived in Sacramento with his wife and 2 teenage daughters, and he immediately invited Sarah to visit. Jennifer was more cautious. She'd been raised by her grandmother, who had always spoken negatively about Robert, painting him as irresponsible and unreliable. Learning that he'd been married and had another daughter he'd kept was painful for her initially. David was shocked to learn that the little girl at those family gatherings, Sarah, was actually his half-sister. He'd always wondered why he was invited to those events when he barely knew Robert outside of work. Amanda and Christina were both eager to connect, but they lived furthest away and had the least information about Robert, so they had the most questions. 6 weeks after Sarah's conversation with Linda, we organized the first group video call with all 6 siblings. I was invited to facilitate, which was honestly one of the most emotional experiences of my career. Seeing them all together on screen for the first time was incredible. The family resemblance was unmistakable. They all had Robert's green eyes, and there were gestures and expressions that were clearly shared genetics. During that first call, they discovered so many similarities beyond just physical appearance. 4 of the 6 were in helping professions: Sarah in psychology, Michael as a paramedic, Jennifer as a teacher, Amanda as a social worker. All 6 were drawn to large families. Those who had children had at least 2 kids each. They all had complicated relationships with the concept of family and belonging. Everyone had felt like something was missing, even those who had loving adoptive or guardian families. 3 months later, in July 2023, Sarah organized the first in-person sibling gathering. She rented a large vacation house on the Oregon coast, and 5 of the 6 siblings came. Christina couldn't make it due to work commitments, but joined virtually. Linda was invited too, which was a difficult decision for everyone. Some of the siblings harbored resentment about the secrecy, while others understood her impossible position. The weekend was intense, emotional, and ultimately healing. Linda was able to share stories about Robert that helped the siblings understand their father better. She showed photos and told stories that helped fill in gaps in their understanding of who he was. Michael brought his adoption records from Catholic Charities, which included letters Robert had written to him over the years that had never been delivered due to the closed adoption policies of the time. Jennifer shared that her grandmother had softened her stance before she died, admitting that Robert had tried to stay involved and had sent money regularly, which the grandmother had been saving for Jennifer's education. By the end of that weekend, they decided to make it an annual tradition. They also created a group text chain that became incredibly active, sharing daily life updates, asking for advice, supporting each other through challenges. The siblings' reunion had ripple effects throughout their extended families. Sarah's children, Emma and Jake, suddenly had 5 new sets of aunt-uncle relationships and multiple new cousins. Michael's teenage daughters were thrilled to have aunts and uncles they'd never known existed. Several of the siblings' spouses initially struggled with the sudden expansion of family obligations and relationships. Not everything has been smooth. There have been disagreements about how to handle Robert's memory, different comfort levels with sharing personal information, and practical challenges about maintaining relationships across multiple states. Jennifer and Amanda had a falling out over something relatively minor that escalated because they're still learning how to navigate sibling relationships as adults. As of our last conversation in early 2024, all 6 siblings remain in contact. They have a group video call every month, and most of them have visited each other in person multiple times. Sarah describes her life now as fuller but more complicated. She's no longer the only child she always believed herself to be, but she's also had to revise her entire understanding of her parents and her childhood. What strikes me most about Sarah's story is how it illustrates something we see repeatedly in DNA discoveries. Families are complicated, people make difficult choices with limited information, and sometimes the thing you've always wanted, in Sarah's case, siblings, has been there all along, hidden by secrets that seemed protective at the time, but ultimately caused more pain than truth would have. Host. Sarah's story is still unfolding. Just last month, she texted me with news that Christina, the sister who lives in Seattle, is engaged, and all 5 siblings are invited to the wedding. It'll be the first major life event they'll all attend together. This case taught me so much about the complexity of family secrets and the ripple effects of choices made decades ago. Robert and Linda thought they were protecting Sarah by keeping her siblings a secret, but they were actually denying her the relationships she craved most. If you're watching this and have taken a DNA test, pay attention to those close matches that don't make sense. If you're considering taking a DNA test, be prepared for the possibility that you might learn things that challenge everything you thought you knew about your family. Drop A in the comments if you think Sarah's story shows the incredible resilience of family bonds, even when they're complicated by secrets and years of separation. If you have a DNA discovery story you'd like to share, you can email us at email. We read every single message, and who knows, your story might be featured in a future episode. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell, because we have another incredible DNA story coming next week. This one involves identical twins who were separated at birth and found each other 60 years later through a DNA test meant to trace their Irish heritage. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thank you for joining me for Sarah's incredible journey from only child to middle sister of 6. Her story reminds us that family isn't just about biology. It's about the love, effort, and choices we make to connect with each other, even when it's complicated. Until next time, keep seeking the truth, keep connecting with family, and remember, your DNA story is always worth telling.